and do added objects.add new game object. Okay. So that's it for the static information and methods and fields. So let's go ahead and add our... In the constructor, we generate a new play screen. So we're going to play right now. So game over is equal to false. Remember, it's a static field or static variable. So if we set game over once and we generate a new play screen, it's going to have game over as true because we set it to true a while ago. So static is class level, and all the objects it does not matter if our object is 20 minutes from now, game over will still be true. So just to be sure, we just set it to false because we want to play again. That's why we generated a new play screen object. So that's why we do that. And now we need to set our added objects to clear. We haven't played yet, so there's no reason to have anything in our added objects list. So that's the constructor. Now we need our region, load and unload region, content here, and a region. Alright, so public override load content, delete base.load content. Now all the bullet, player, and enemy, we generated our static texture 2D objects to hold the texture of our player, enemy, or bullet. So that's where we set them here. Bullet.bullet texture is equal to get to the content, we do content manager content is equal to screen manager dot content. Lowercase content for the local reference. So bullet.bullet texture is equal to content.load. It's a type of texture 2D. Open parentheses, open quotes. Now we go to our content portion, sprites folder, and get our bullet texture and copy its asset name. Now it's in sprites folder, so we open our quotes, capital sprite with an S. It's a folder, so slash, and paste the asset name. End quote, end parentheses, and semicolon. Player.player texture is equal to content.load. It's a texture 2D. It's in the sprites folder slash. Go to the player texture you are using, copy its asset name, paste it in end quote, end parentheses, and semicolon. Enemy.enemy texture is equal to content.load. It's a texture 2D, and it's in the sprites folder, so sprites slash, go to the enemy texture you are using, copy its asset name, paste it in the string, end quote, end parentheses, and semicolon. Alright, so all of our textures are being loaded as a texture 2D object, and we're just using our sprites. Alright, so now we have our font object up here. So we need to load that as well. So font is equal to content.load. It's a sprite font object. And the asset name, it's inside the fonts folder, so opening quote, fonts capital F slash, and the asset name, just game font, end quote, end parentheses, and semicolon. Alright, so that's font. Now we need to do player, lowercase p, is equal to new player, and then we pass out the viewport, which you can get from screen manager.viewport. And we're ready to go. Now, another issue I had during the recording of the previous tutorial is I'm doing something completely different than the original source. The game I did a year and a half ago, or whenever I first released that game, is we didn't have a player object. We didn't have a reference to our player. So the other tutorial, or the one I just did that was 50 minutes long, is we just did this and we're ready to go. And whenever we updated our game objects or our current objects, this was not being updated because it's not in that list, and things got all wacky. And we wanted to check collision, and things got all wacky, so what we ended up doing is we just went into the game objects and add player. So now player has a reference to the player object, and game objects has a reference to the player object. That's completely fine, but if we modify one area, it modifies the other area, which sometimes we want, sometimes we don't. But once you know that, you always want that. Okay, so that's all we need to do. We have a local reference to our player, and we have a list reference to our player. Now we need a public override unload, delete base.unload. Let's add bullet texture is equal to null. Player.player, capital player, is equal to player.player texture is equal to null. Capital enemy dot enemy texture is equal to null. And our font is equal to null. Alright. So that's it for the load and unload. Now all we need to do is spawn enemy. Let's create a new region. Update methods. Alright. So our update methods, our update will call a spawn enemy and a handle input and a check collision method. So let's create our spawn enemy first. Public void spawn enemy. Alright, so our spawn enemy, we need to decrease the spawn seconds. If you want to do that effect, if you don't, just delete that line and things will be happy. Or delete the following two lines as well. If spawn seconds is less than or equal to, or less than 0, spawn seconds is equal to max spawn seconds. Alright, so what this does is we have 10 seconds for an enemy to spawn. 10 seconds later, an enemy will spawn, and then the timer will now be 9 seconds. So the timer keeps on getting shorter and shorter and shorter, so an enemy is just going to keep on getting faster and faster. And then once it reaches 0, it goes back to the maximum, which is 10 seconds. So that's what that is doing. Now we need to generate another new timer. Time span dot from seconds and spawn seconds, and game objects dot add enemy dot generate enemy, screen manager dot view port, and player. See, this is one of the instances, two closing parentheses. This is one of the instances that if you look at the other source, the ones that's completed, in this method, we had to do a for each loop, and we tested to see if the object we were looking at is a player, and then we set that to a local reference. So that's why I thought it would be best to have a reference that we just grab right off the bat when we do the constructor or the load content. We just have a player reference, so right off the bat we do not have to do any more looping to find the player, so we can just do it this way. So that's one of the advantages of having another reference, single reference to that player object. Okay, So that is it for the spawn enemy. Now what we need to do is check collision. Public void check collision. Now this will be a little tricky, and this is one of the methods that ran into trouble last time, because as you remember me talking about a few minutes ago, we just had the player in this only. So we just added it to this list and everything's fine. Alright, so let's see if I can... Last tutorial I talked about modifying the video and see if I can get a diagram shown up. But since that one took 50 minutes and I want to keep it short, I don't know if I'll get a chance to edit the video. But imagine a list of items, a list of game objects we have here. A single list. On the left side of a screen or left side of the paper or whatever's convenient for you. On the left side of something. Now take that same list and copy it to the right side. So we have two identical lists. Now if we look at the very top of the list, we have a single game object item. On the left side, we have a single game object item. On the right side, if we look at the very top of the list, we have the same exact item. Now, we do not need to check the collision of that item. So, we check the first item on the left side list and the second item on the right side list. And we keep looking at the first item, but we keep on going down on the right side list. So we'll check if the first item collides with the second item, if the first item collides with the third item, and the first item collides with the fourth item, and so on. So, you can see where this is going. So, once we finish the list on the right side, we are done. But we need to update the object we want to check with on the left side to the one below it. Now, if we go to the very top of the right side, we're just checking to see if 2 collides with 1 again, which we've just done before. We just did that in reverse. We checked if 1 collides with 2. So we do not need to check that. And we do not need to check if 2 collides with 2 because they're the same object. So we just need to check to see if 2 collides with 3, 2 collides with 4, and so on. And then we need to check if 3 collides with 4, and 3 collides with 5. And you can see where this is going. So we need 2 for loops. For int I is equal to 0, I is less than GameObjects.count I++. Opening and closing curly brackets. For, let's call this one int j. J is equal to 0. Or, no, j is equal to I plus 1. Alright. J is less than GameObjects.count. Remember, the array won't get bigger. We want to keep the array the same, but we just want to change what we're looking at on the right side. Count, semicolon, J++. And just like my little explanation, if I is 0, we're looking at the first element. So we do not need to check that the first element intersects with the first element, because they're the same element. It'll always be colliding with it because it's in the same space. So we just need to check to see if the first element collides with every single element other than the first element. Then, likewise, we need to check to see if the second element collides with everything but the first and second element, because we already checked to see if the second element collided with the first element. That's why we just put I plus 1. Okay, so once we do that, we need to do the collision checking. So if 2 opening parentheses GameObjects sub I dot rectangle dot intersects, that's a method built into the rectangle object, and that just detects, it returns